Hey guys. Tonight we're wandering into a place colder than your ex's heart. A medieval castle in the middle of winter. Picture this. Thick stone walls. Dripping with condensation. Your breath fogging the air like a dragon's sigh. The room echoes with silence and the occasional creak of ancient timber. Somewhere in this vast, icy fortress, an emperor and a queen are trying to get some sleep. You, too, are here, padding softly across uneven floors. Drawn toward the grand bed draped in faded velvet. Its canopy hanging heavy like frozen curtains. You can almost feel the chill seeping through your shoes. Even the moonlight seems to shiver. Let's be honest. You wouldn't last 5 minutes in here without your modern heater or electric blanket. Back then, warmth was luxury, and the night was an adversary. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from tonight, what city? What time is it? I love imagining where all of you are falling asleep across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step closer to the royal bed. It's huge, almost comically so. As if built for giants. The posts rise tall and dark. Carved with twisting vines and mythical beasts. But despite the grandeur, the bed looks unforgiving. The sheets are thick, the blankets heavy, yet the air biting cold. You imagine sliding between those stiff linen sheets, only to find them as icy as a slab of marble. No wonder medieval royals wore fur to bed. The chill in these walls is ancient. Bone deep, the stones themselves seem to remember centuries of winters, the kind of cold that doesn't just touch your skin but hums in your chest. You glance at the window, a narrow slit of glassless emptiness stuffed with oiled cloth to block the wind. It flaps faintly, whispering with each gust. Outside, the snow falls like powdered silence. Inside, the air smells faintly of smoke, damp wool, and history. A single torch flickers by the door. Its light dances on the tapestry, scenes of hunts and battles. But even the lions in the fabric look like they're shivering. Somewhere down the corridor, you hear footsteps, soft, rhythmic, fading away, maybe a servant, bringing another log for the hearth. It's strange, isn't it? You'd think that kings and queens, with all their wealth and jewels, would have found a way to escape the cold. But here, the mightiest people in the realm shivered just like everyone else. The crown didn't come with central heating. And if you listen closely, you might catch the faint crackle of a distant fire, not enough to warm the vast stone chamber. In winter, castles were less homes and more drafty fortresses. The cold was part of the architecture, part of the power, a reminder that comfort was something only the gods could promise. You move toward the fireplace. Its embers glow low, their warmth barely reaching past your knees. The chimney is massive, built to funnel out smoke but also to swallow heat whole. It's a paradox, a roaring fire that never truly warms. A few brave sparks leap upward, disappearing into the darkness above. You hold your hands out, pretending to feel them. The air nips your fingers like tiny teeth. And still, somehow, they slept here, wrapped in layers of wool, velvet, and fur, tucked under blankets so heavy it probably took 2 servants to lift them. They shared the bed not out of love, but out of survival. Two monarchs against the merciless chill. The silence grows deeper. You can almost hear your own pulse echoing against the stone. There's something hypnotic about it, the slow rhythm of the night, the subtle hum of the past. You picture the emperor, lying awake, staring at the canopy above, counting the patterns in the wood carvings because sleep won't come easily in a room like this. Maybe he's thinking of his kingdom. Or maybe just wondering if the fireplace will die before morning. You, too, feel the weight of centuries pressing down. It's peaceful, in a strange way, the kind of quiet that makes your thoughts drift slower. Like snowflakes settling. And you start to notice little things. The draft sneaking through cracks in the wall. The faint scent of beeswax and ashes. The tapestry swaying ever so slightly with the air. Every sound becomes its own lullaby, distant hoot of an owl. Whisper of frost along the window. The steady beat of your own breath. If you close your eyes, you can almost imagine sleeping here, under layers of fur. Your face buried in a pillow that smells faintly of lavender and smoke. You'd probably dream of fire. Or sunlight. Or both. Some historians still debate whether medieval castles were truly as cold as described. Or if chroniclers exaggerated for dramatic flair. But when you stand here, even in imagination, it's hard to believe anyone could have exaggerated this chill. This isn't just cold, it's timeless. It seeps into stories, into memories, into the very stones themselves. And as you breathe slowly, the castle breathes with you. Every inhale stirs a wisp of dust. Every exhale fogs the air in front of you. It's as if the past itself is sighing softly, content to rest another night. The torch sputters, the fire hums. Somewhere, a bell tolls midnight, one hollow note, echoing across the empty halls. You draw the blanket closer around your shoulders, in your mind. At least, and let the sound linger. Because this is where we begin, in the cold heart of a medieval night. Where sleep was an act of courage, and warmth of fleeting luxury. And as the wind sighs outside, you can almost hear it whisper through the cracks. Welcome to the royal winter. You're not getting out until morning. The night deepens, and the castle seems to exhale a long, slow sigh, like an ancient beast settling into its frozen slumber. You're still awake, lying in that enormous royal bed, staring up at the canopy. The velvet above you sways ever so slightly. And you realize, it's not because of the wind, but because the air in here moves. Even the tiniest draft snakes its way across the room, licking your nose and reminding you that comfort was a privilege, not a guarantee. You shift beneath the mountain of covers, wool, linen, fur, another layer of fur. And something that might have once been a bear. The bed creaks. Somewhere in the corner, a piece of ice slides down the inside of the wall with a faint crackle. You think about the emperor, wrapped in his own cocoon of blankets, and the queen, in a chamber nearby, both pretending the cold didn't exist because it was unworthy of royal complaint. But the truth? Even the mightiest rulers of the medieval world trembled under their crowns during winter nights like this. Outside, the world was a frozen wasteland. Fields lay empty, rivers turned to glass, and the peasants who served these royals were huddled around smoky hearths, praying their thatched roofs didn't cave under snow. Inside these stone walls, however, the emperor had more pressing problems than war or politics. like how to fall asleep without his toes turning blue. You can picture it, can't you? He sits on the edge of the bed, wearing a night robe thick enough to stand upright on its own, muttering about how this is the coldest winter since the birth of Charlemagne. The servants nod dutifully, though they've heard him say that every year. The irony of power is that it can't change nature. A crown can command armies, but not the wind. You can tax your people into ruin, but the snow won't melt faster for it. The winter didn't bow to kings or queens, it made equals of everyone. And so, to survive, the royals built defenses not of soldiers, but of fabrics. You imagine the emperor calling for his chamberlain, "Bring me another quilt." And the chamberlain, exhausted, dragging in yet another massive blanket, embroidered, perfumed, and probably heavier than a warhorse's saddle. The emperor sighs in relief as it lands on him like a soft avalanche. Meanwhile, the queen's chamber lies down the hall. Quieter, more refined, but just as cold. Her maids scurry about, lighting candles, rubbing oil into her hands to keep the blood lively. A practiced physician swore by. It never really worked. Still, she smiles gracefully. Queens always did, even when their teeth chattered behind those serene smiles. You'd think the castles of Europe, with their soaring ceilings and lavish decor, would be symbols of comfort. But no, those vaulted chambers trapped cold air the way caves trap echoes. The higher the ceiling, the colder the night. It's as if the architecture itself was designed to humble the human body, a grand stone reminder that luxury can still be uncomfortable. You glance at the window again. There's frost creeping along the edges. Delicate as lace, deadly as silence. You can trace patterns on the glass with your breath. It's oddly soothing. This quiet suffering, the kind of stillness that makes time blur. Sometimes, you think, maybe that's why medieval people prayed so much. Not just for salvation, but for distraction. Anything to take their minds off the cold. The emperor probably whispered psalms while his feet froze under brocade sheets. Historians still debate how effective those great hearths truly were. Some say they barely heated a corner of the room. Others insist that with enough wood, and servants to feed the flames, they could make it bearable. But none deny that even kings felt winter's bite. In some chronicles, you can almost sense the envy, scribes writing about peasants who slept near cows for warmth. Secretly thinking, lucky them. You chuckle softly at the thought, the idea of a king jealous of a farmer's cow. But that's the thing about the medieval world. Comfort was a strange equalizer. When the temperature dropped low enough, everyone's nose turned red. You shift again. The sheets rustle like dry leaves. You picture yourself reaching out toward the bedside table, a sturdy oak thing cluttered with a bronze candle holder, a silver cup, maybe a half-finished goblet of spiced wine. The wine is cold now, but the scent still lingers: cinnamon, clove, and something faintly metallic. The kind of drink that promised warmth but delivered only illusion. You sip it in your imagination. It burns slightly, then fades. Outside, the wind howls across the battlements, rattling shutters that were never meant to seal tightly. A gust sneaks under the door, just enough to make the candle flicker and the shadows tremble. You smile to yourself. This is the kind of night modern people would call romantic. If they didn't have to live through it. A night of medieval beauty, where the moon glows on snow, and every breath turns to mist. But the emperor lying next to you, metaphorically, of course, would disagree. Romance fades quickly when you can't feel your fingers. Still, you can't help admiring it. The courage it took to face nights like these with dignity. To pretend that the frost creeping over your bedpost was merely a decoration. That's royal discipline, or maybe just denial. You tug your imaginary blanket higher, covering your chin. The air smells of soot and tallow, a mix of smoke and candle grease. It's oddly nostalgic, the scent of endurance. Down the corridor, a bell rings, faint and slow. Maybe the monastery nearby, or perhaps just the rhythm of the night keeping time for no one in particular. You let the sound drift into your thoughts. The emperor might have fallen asleep by now, wrapped in velvet dreams, his crown resting nearby on a table too cold to touch. You wonder if he dreams of summer. And as you listen to the wind hum through arrow slits, it's easy to imagine that this is what eternity sounds like, steady, patient, indifferent. The castle doesn't care if you're an emperor or a wanderer like you. It simply stands, year after year, collecting whispers, holding secrets, keeping the cold. You breathe out slowly. The air clouds before your face, then vanishes. The night, as always, remains. The fire has dimmed to a soft orange glow. A tired eye watching over the room. You sit up slightly, pulling the thick covers tighter around your shoulders. The chill creeps in again, silent but determined, like an uninvited guest slipping through cracks. You realize now that no matter how much heat you try to summon, the castle always wins. It's built for defense, not comfort. The very walls that once kept out invaders now trap the cold inside. You reach out, brushing your fingers over the coarse linen. It's rough, scratchy even, nothing like the soft cotton you know today. Beneath the top layer lies another, and another, and another, wool, fur, silk, layers upon layers. That was the secret weapon of medieval survival, not technology, not invention, but textiles. The emperors and queens of the Middle Ages might have ruled vast empires. But every night they faced a battle against the temperature. The only armor that mattered after sunset was made of fabric. You imagine the royal servants bustling around before bedtime, their arms heavy with folded cloth. There's a faint scent of lavender in the air, one of the few luxuries used to disguise the smell of damp fabric. A maid bows low, carefully arranging each layer on the bed, linen to wick moisture, wool to trap heat, fur to seal it in, and maybe, if the royal treasury was generous, a final sheet of silk. Just for the illusion of grace. You sink deeper into your thoughts, tracing the texture of each imagined layer. The wool feels itchy but solid, reassuring. The fur, warm, but faintly oily, smelling of the animal it once belonged to. You realize how intimate survival was in these days. To live meant to live close to the fire. Close to others, close to the creatures that shared your warmth. The emperor might have draped himself in ermine or sable, white and glossy, proof of his wealth. The queen, meanwhile, probably preferred mink or lynx, soft and subtle, though sometimes her conscience stirred. She might whisper a prayer for the animals before sleep. Then again, maybe she didn't. The cold had a way of silencing guilt. You think about the symbolism of it all. Rulers wrapped in the spoils of their dominion, literally sleeping beneath the weight of their empire. And yet, despite the luxury, despite the layers, they still shivered. It's funny, isn't it? You, with your modern duvet and thermostat, would never imagine wearing 3 tunics to bed. But in those days, everyone did, emperors, peasants, priests. The difference was just the quality of the cloth. And even then, the cold didn't care much for hierarchy. You picture yourself now in a chamber where the air feels alive, not with warmth, but with movement. Every draft has a name. The north creep slips under the door. The chimney ghost sneaks down from above. The window whisper brushes against your cheek. Each one is a small reminder that winter is patient and thorough. You chuckle under your breath. The medieval version of climate control wasn't a thermostat, it was how many cloaks you could wear without suffocating. You can almost hear the royal attendants arguing quietly. His Majesty requests another blanket. But there are already 6. Then make it 7. The cold doesn't care about math. Historians still debate just how frigid these castles truly were. Some argue that people simply adapted, that their bodies, conditioned by years without heating, didn't mind it as much. Others believe they suffered constantly, and the elaborate layering was more endurance than adaptation. Perhaps both are true. You stretch your legs a little, imagining what it must have felt like to climb into bed after a day spent in armor or ceremony. The relief of taking off the crown, literally and metaphorically. And then, just as you're about to drift off, a cruel gust slips under the covers and bites your ankles. That, you think, is when you truly understand the limits of royal power. Even kings couldn't order the cold to stop. You glance toward the fire again. It's barely alive now, reduced to a red pulse among the ashes. A servant might have been assigned to keep it burning through the night. But even they must have drifted off eventually, lulled by exhaustion and the endless hum of frost. You imagine that faint hum now, the sound of winter breathing against stone. The tapestries sway slightly on the walls, their woven threads absorbing centuries of whispers. Maybe one of them depicts a summer scene, green fields, gold sunlight, a reminder of warmth that feels like a myth. The queen might look at that tapestry before closing her eyes, pretending, for a moment, that she can step into it. That beyond those stitched clouds lies a place where mornings come without frost. You yawn softly. The layers around you grow heavier. Not just with warmth, but with time. Each one feels like a century laid upon your shoulders. The air thickens. The candle trembles, its flame struggling against the invisible fingers of the cold. And for a fleeting second, you understand why medieval people treated sleep almost like a ceremony, a nightly surrender. A quiet act of faith that morning would return. Because in the dead of winter, in a castle that hums like a frozen cathedral, even emperors and queens slept not in comfort, but in courage. The fire exhales one last spark. The shadows stretch longer. Somewhere in the dark, you swear you can hear the faint rustle of fur and linen, the echo of ancient sleepers turning in their beds. You pull the covers closer. The world outside disappears. And the castle, once again, claims the night. You wake sometime later, or maybe you never truly slept. The night inside the castle has no edges. No real beginning or end. It just is, vast, heavy, and endless. You lie still, listening. Somewhere, deep in the walls, the fire gives a tired sigh. The last ember flickers like a heartbeat fading into silence. This is when you start to understand why the hearth, that wide, gaping mouth of stone and flame, was everything. Without it, the night could swallow you whole. Medieval people didn't just build fireplaces for warmth. They built them for life itself. You turn your head toward it now. The grand hearth looms across the chamber, taller than a man and blackened by centuries of smoke. A few lazy wisps of warmth still rise, curling toward the ceiling beams where soot hangs like midnight cobwebs. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the stories it's witnessed: confessions, conspiracies, whispered prayers. Fire was the heartbeat of the medieval night. When it roared, the room felt alive. When it dimmed, even the bravest souls shivered. The emperor, for all his power, probably slept facing the fire, his eyes half open, wary that it might die while he dreamed. A single log could mean the difference between comfort and misery. You rise slowly, wrapping your fur-lined cloak around your shoulders. The floor is like ice beneath your feet, thick stone, frozen from below. You cross the room toward the hearth, and each step sounds too loud in the silence. The coals still glow, faint but stubborn, holding on like little red promises. You kneel and stretch your hands toward them. The warmth barely reaches your palms. But even that whisper of heat feels like kindness. The air carries a sharp scent: ash, charred wood, and a trace of oak smoke that lingers in your hair. You remember reading once that servants in medieval castles worked in shifts through the night, carrying logs from the woodpile to keep the fires alive. Imagine that, shuffling through icy corridors in the dark, arms full of frozen firewood, praying you don't trip and wake the royal temper. Some froze to death before dawn. Others simply nodded off by the hearth, faces glowing red from the heat, their dreams filled with crackling sounds. You sit there now, imagining them, the humblest people in the empire, entrusted with the most sacred task, feeding the flame. A king could command armies, but he still needed a half-asleep boy with sooty hands to keep his fire alive. The irony isn't lost on you. Power, for all its grandeur, depends on someone else staying awake. You reach for a poker, stirring the embers. They hiss softly, glowing brighter for a moment before settling again. The sparks leap like tiny stars, fleeting and beautiful. For a second, the room feels warm again. But the castle doesn't let you forget what it is. The warmth fades quickly, absorbed by the walls that drink heat faster than thirst. You glance up. The ceiling is lost in darkness. Massive beams stretch overhead like the ribs of some sleeping beast. The shadows shift with each flicker of light. You think of the queen in her chamber. Not far from here, her fireplace might be smaller, more decorative, its smoke funneling up a slender flue. The maids would be crouched around it, whispering stories as they rubbed their hands. Maybe one tells a tale about ghosts haunting cold rooms, a popular theme. Because who wouldn't blame a spirit for returning just to find warmth? You smiled to yourself. Even in fear, people sought the fire. It was the only thing that made sense in a world that froze half the year. There's something almost holy about it, isn't there? The way humans have always gathered around light. You, me, them. No matter the century. We still do the same. watching fire dance, hypnotized, pretending the flames understand us. The emperor likely had rituals for this moment. Maybe he made a sign of the cross before sleep. Maybe he muttered to the fire as if it were an old friend. Maybe, just maybe, he whispered to it, "Stay." You stretch your hands once more, trying to capture a little more heat before retreating to bed. But as soon as you move away, the cold rushes back in like an ambush. The floor, the walls, even the air feels sharper now. You hurry under the blankets again, half laughing at yourself. Some things never change, you whisper, the moment you leave the fire. Regret follows. Outside, the wind picks up. It moans through the arrow slits. Low and mournful. The sound is almost human. A lament for all the winters this castle has seen. You close your eyes, letting the rhythm of the wind blend with the faint pop of cooling embers. There's a strange comfort in it, the reminder that you're just another traveler in time, listening to the same sounds that lulled emperors and queens to uneasy dreams. Historians still argue over how warm those great hearths could truly make a room. Some insist they worked miracles. Others claim they barely took the edge off. But one thing is certain, when the fire died, everything else did too. And tonight, lying here, you feel that truth settle over you. The warmth fades, the silence thickens, the last ember sighs. You pull the covers up to your chin and imagine you're one of them, a royal sleeper in a world of stone and frost. Your breath fogs the air. The room breathes it in. And the castle, cold and eternal, waits for dawn. The sound comes first, a faint shuffle, soft as the rustle of wool. Then another. You open your eyes. The room is still cloaked in darkness, save for a thread of pale moonlight sliding through the slit of a window. At first, you think it's your imagination. But no, there it is again. Someone's moving. You lie very still, your breath shallow. The air smells faintly of ash and old fur. Then you see them, the servants of the night. There are two of them, wrapped in cloaks too thin for comfort. Faces pale and sleepy. One carries a bundle of logs in his arms. The other a candle that trembles in the draught. They don't speak. They've done this 1,000 times before. Their boots make soft thuds on the stone floor as they move toward the hearth, careful not to wake their sovereign. The emperor still sleeps, or at least pretends to. Royals had a habit of letting people believe they were always half awake, always aware. It made servants behave better. But tonight, even he seems human, bundled under mountains of blankets. The faint outline of his crown still visible on the table beside him. The servants kneel by the fire, adding new logs with the tenderness of a nurse tending a patient. The sparks rise eagerly, a brief constellation of orange and gold. The taller servant whispers something, a prayer, perhaps, or a complaint lost to the crackle. You watch them, unseen, as they stifle yawns and stretch stiff fingers toward the warmth. Their faces glow for a heartbeat. Then the fire settles into its steady rhythm again. They stay a little longer than necessary. Who could blame them? The fire is the only friendly thing awake at this hour. You can almost hear their thoughts. Just a few more minutes, just until my hands stop shaking. But time is cruel in a cold castle. The candle wavers, and duty tugs them back to their endless rounds. There are dozens of rooms like this, chambers, corridors, guard posts, all needing fire, all needing someone to tend it. When one hearth dies, another calls. You imagine the route they'll take, down narrow staircases slick with frost, across courtyards where the wind bites their cheeks raw, past doors sealed against the cold. They'll refill buckets of coal, stack logs on their shoulders, and carry warmth through darkness like silent messengers. It's strange, isn't it? You never think of servants when you picture royal knights. History remembers crowns, not calluses. Yet without these ghosts of the night, the emperor would wake to ice on his pillow. One of them pauses before leaving. He glances back at the bed, at the shape beneath the blankets, and for just a moment, his expression softens. Pity, maybe, or envy. Or perhaps he's thinking what everyone thinks on nights like this. Is he even warmer than I am? Because warmth, in this world, wasn't guaranteed by power. It was earned, log by log, ember by ember. The door creaks softly as they leave, and the silence rolls back in like a tide. You feel it instantly, the absence of movement, the stillness that reclaims everything. Only the faint hiss of the fire remains, whispering into the void. You let out a quiet breath. The servants are gone, but somehow their presence lingers, their tired devotion etched into the rhythm of the night. You can almost see their footprints melting briefly on the cold stones before disappearing. The emperor shifts slightly in his sleep. Maybe the new warmth has reached him at last. Or maybe it's just a dream, one of those rare, pleasant ones where the air isn't made of knives. And you, still watching, start to feel the weight of their routine. The endless loop of tending and waiting. The quiet heroism in repetition. It's almost poetic, how the smallest acts kept empires alive. You remember something a chronicler once wrote, that servants in royal households were forbidden to fall asleep by the fire. But who could resist? More than one was found snoring beside the hearth, hands still black with soot, faces glowing red like embers. The punishment was usually mild. After all, everyone understood. In winter, warmth was temptation itself. You shift under the covers, amused at the thought. Even kings, you think, probably envied those few stolen minutes of warmth. Outside, the wind sighs again, dragging its cold fingers through the battlements. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howls. Or maybe it's just the air echoing through the towers. Inside, all is calm. The fire burns steady now, casting soft shadows on the walls. The emperor's breath is slow, measured. The tapestry beside you stirs gently, the lines in its threads seeming to blink in the light. The servants of the night are gone, but their work endures, invisible, unthanked, and essential. And as you drift towards sleep, you realize something quietly profound. Even in a world of crowns and kingdoms, it was the simplest hands that kept the darkness away. The fire hums one last time. The air warms a fraction. And the castle breathes with you, slow, heavy, alive. Until morning creeps in again, and the night's keepers fade into legend. You drift for a while between waking and sleep, the way people do when they're not sure which world feels colder. The room hums softly, a blend of wind, fire, and distant echoes. You pull the blanket higher, burying your face in the fur, and your eyes trace the tall bedposts rising into the shadows above. That's when you notice it again, the canopy. It hangs low and heavy, carved from dark oak and draped in layers of thick cloth. The edges are trimmed with golden tassels that sway faintly each time the wind sneaks through the cracks. It looks beautiful, yes, but the truth is far more practical. That elegant canopy? It's not decoration, it's survival. You shift a little, reaching out to touch the fabric. The material feels rough and dense, woven tight enough to trap warmth. In the Middle Ages, people called these grand beds heaven beds, partly because of the canopies that hung above like little skies. But the heaven part was mostly wishful thinking. The canopy wasn't there to look divine, it was there to keep you from freezing to death. You smile faintly, realizing how much of royal luxury was just very clever engineering disguised as beauty. The thick canopy held the warmth that rose from bodies, furs, and fire. It also kept out the cold that dripped from those stone ceilings like invisible frost. It even caught falling dust and bugs, because yes, the medieval dream of nobility came with spiders. You glance up, watching the faint movement of the fabric, and imagine the emperor lying beneath it centuries ago, cocooned in his own portable microclimate. The bed curtains were drawn shut every night, enclosing him in a small, warm chamber within the larger frozen room, a kind of fabric fortress. Private, you whisper to yourself. That's another reason. Curtains didn't just keep warmth in, they kept eyes out. The royal bed wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a stage. In some courts, the act of rising or retiring to bed was ceremonial, witnessed by nobles and attendants. The emperor would lie down in public, surrounded by people, then signal for the curtains to be drawn. Only once they fell, soft and slow, did he finally become just a man again. You can picture it, a dozen servants bowing, the flicker of candles, the rustle of silk, the curtains close with a whisper. And suddenly, silence, a moment of humanity hidden behind woven walls. The queen's bed, of course, was even more intricate. Her canopy likely shimmered with embroidery, vines, stars, saints, stories stitched in gold thread. Each night she would vanish behind them like a magician, leaving the court to imagine what royalty looked like in sleep. There's something tender about that, isn't there? The most powerful people in the world, huddling under fabric, pretending they were untouchable while hiding from the same cold that plagued everyone else. You chuckle softly. It's the kind of irony history forgets to mention. Power often looks like comfort, until you realize the throne room was colder than your freezer. A gust of wind sneaks in through the window slit, making the canopy ripple. For a moment, it almost looks alive, breathing with the rhythm of the night. The sound it makes is oddly soothing, a soft flap like the turning of pages. You settle back into the bed, imagining what it felt like to draw those curtains shut. The air inside would grow warm quickly, filled with the scent of wool, fur, and candle smoke. You'd hear your own breath louder, your heart beat closer. The space would shrink until the whole world was reduced to a few square feet of fabric and the soft hiss of fire. Claustrophobic? Maybe, but in a castle like this, where every sound echoed and every shadow looked like an intruder, the canopy must have felt like safety. Historians still argue about whether medieval beds were truly as massive as legend claims. Some say yes, they were huge, often shared with attendants or visiting nobles. Others think the myth grew over time, fueled by the imagination of later centuries. But what's certain is that the canopy bed became a fortress against winter's assault. You picture the emperor now, half asleep under layers of blankets, one hand poking out to adjust the curtain. The fabric brushes his wrist, warm, heavy, reassuring. Outside, the wind howls, but inside, he's wrapped in silence. There's a rhythm to this room, the crackle of the hearth, the soft creak of wood, the faint snap of fabric shifting overhead. It's like the castle itself is whispering lullabies, its voice rough but kind. You close your eyes again. The canopy makes the world smaller, darker, quieter. Your imagination starts to slow. You can almost feel the centuries thinning, the cold, the rituals, the unending nights. And just before sleep claims you again, one last thought drifts through. Even the grandest beds in history were never about luxury. They were about survival, a human need so simple it outlasted every crown. The curtain sways once more. The wind sighs. And you, safe beneath your own invisible canopy, breathe in the stillness of another medieval night. The night stretches on, and when you stir again, the castle hasn't changed, it rarely does. Time here moves slowly, as if the cold itself freezes the hours. You shift under the covers, half asleep, half aware, and the fabric rustles like distant waves. You think about what you're lying on, what they called a mattress back then. Though if you could see it, you might hesitate to use the same word. You press your palm down. It's lumpy, uneven, soft in some places, stubbornly hard in others. The bed of a medieval emperor might have looked grand, embroidered, gilded, towering like a throne, but beneath all the splendor, it was still a sack of stuffing. Literally. Back then, the richness of your sleep could be measured by what was stuffed beneath you. Straw, feathers, or down, each filling told a story about your status, your health, even your soul. Peasants, of course, had straw, dry if they were lucky, damp if they weren't. You can almost imagine the smell, that earthy, grassy scent of fields and sweat. It wasn't comfortable, but it was home. The sound of straw crunching under a tired body was a kind of lullaby for them. But you, dear listener, are royalty tonight, and royalty didn't settle for straw. Your mattress, if you can call it that, is filled with goose feathers. Soft and light, layered in thick linen casing. The feathers shift when you move, sighing softly like tired snow. Feathers were a symbol of privilege. The more you had, the closer you were to heaven. Down feathers, the tiny ones from under the bird's outer layer, were prized above gold. Entire fortunes were spent collecting them. It took hundreds of geese to fill a single mattress. Imagine that. Armies of servants plucking feathers, coughing through clouds of fluff. All so the emperor could sleep a little closer to comfort. But there's a dark little truth behind that luxury. Those feather beds weren't exactly fragrant. Without the right drying or cleaning, they reeked faintly of bird and age. Royals masked it with herbs, lavender, thyme, and rosemary, sewn into small linen pouches that hid between the folds. The smell of sleep in a medieval castle was something between a farm, a garden, and a fireplace. You chuckle softly at the thought. Not exactly the fairy tale aroma we like to imagine. Still, there's something oddly touching about it. The way even the most powerful people on earth slept on nature itself. Straw, feathers, wool, all reminders that human comfort has always been borrowed from the world around us. You shift again, and a faint creak escapes the bed frame. It's made of oak, thick, old, and heavy enough to survive centuries. The sound is almost like a sigh. You can picture servants tightening the ropes beneath the mattress every morning, adjusting the tension to keep the bed firm. That's where the saying, "sleep tight," actually comes from. Tightening the ropes that held your bed together so you wouldn't sag through the night. You grin. Who knew that phrase carried 1,000 years of insomnia? The emperor's bed, of course, had the best ropes, woven strong and laced in intricate patterns. The mattress lay upon them like a drum, suspended above the cold floor. Still, even he wasn't immune to the occasional slump. Perhaps that's why monarchs were so grumpy before breakfast. You think of the queen again. In her adjoining chamber, her bed, softer perhaps, smelled of rosewater and beeswax. She preferred smaller mattresses, easier to warm, easier to feel human in. History says some queens traveled with their own bedding from castle to castle, refusing to sleep on another ruler's feathers. As if a mattress could remember secrets. And maybe it could. You run your hand along the blanket, feeling the uneven lumps beneath. Every dent, every hollow feels like an echo, the weight of centuries pressing gently into the fabric. These beds outlasted their owners. After all, people came and went, but the beds stayed. Historians like to describe medieval life as brutal. But lying here, in the quiet warmth of a feather-filled cocoon, you start to see the small victories. To build a bed this soft out of the bones of winter was its own kind of triumph. You breathe in. The air smells faintly of smoke and old wood. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the low call of an owl. The castle sleeps. And for a moment, so do you, almost. But before you drift fully, one last thought lingers. For all our modern comforts, our memory foam, our heated blankets, we're not so different. We still chase the same thing kings did: warmth, softness, peace. The only difference is, your mattress doesn't creak when you roll over. You smile into the darkness, nestling deeper into your imaginary feathers. The night hums, the wind sighs. And once again, the castle wins, gently, quietly, completely. When you wake again, you're not sure if it's dawn or merely the hour when the cold becomes bold enough to bite through dreams. The air is so still it almost hums. And a thin line of moonlight cuts across the canopy above your head. You blink, tug the blanket closer, and then notice something curious. A folded garment hanging at the foot of the bed. It's the emperor's night clothes. Now, pajamas isn't quite the right word, at least not the kind you know. Medieval rulers didn't slip into soft cotton sets printed with moons and stars. Their bedtime attire was a whole ensemble, designed less for comfort and more for survival, and perhaps a touch of vanity. You sit up and lift the heavy robe. It's thick, velvet, lined with fur, and smells faintly of candle wax and smoke. The sleeves are long enough to hide your hands. The collar brushes your jaw like a gentle animal. The color is dark crimson, the kind that once meant royal blood, though tonight it mostly means warmth. You can almost see him, the emperor himself, pacing before bed. swaddled in layer after layer, looking less like a ruler and more like a very determined onion. He'd wear woolen hose, a long chemise, a padded under tunic, then this robe on top. And over all that, perhaps a fur-trimmed cap that looked suspiciously like something your grandfather might wear when the heating breaks. You can't help but smile. For all the pomp and power, there's something endearingly human about a man trying to look majestic while dressed for hibernation. The Queen, of course, would have her own version, far more elegant. Her nightgown might be made of fine linen or silk, embroidered with tiny golden threads that shimmered by firelight. She might wrap herself in a robe of ermine or squirrel fur, with sleeves so long they dragged gracefully across the floor. But let's be honest, they probably weren't dragging gracefully by morning. She'd wear a nightcap too, to keep her hair in place, though historians say it was more for warmth than vanity. After all, when you sleep in a castle made of stone, every inch of your body is a potential exit for heat. The nightcap was the medieval version of a thermostat. You imagine the royal couple now, side by side in their separate chambers, him in red velvet, her in pale silk, both wrapped up like medieval marshmallows. Not exactly the fiery romance of legends, but practical nonetheless. It's funny to think how much fashion has changed. What we call sleepwear today was once a badge of status. The richer you were, the more layers you wore. Poorer folk often slept in their day clothes, out of necessity. But royalty? They transformed bedtime into ceremony. Even the act of disrobing was choreographed. Servants waited with candles while the emperor shed his golden garments, one by one, until only his robe of rest remained. It was almost poetic, a nightly surrender of power. And yet, not entirely private. Sleeping, in those days, was a semi-public affair. A ruler rarely slept alone. Attendants might doze in the corner, ready to fetch hot stones or refill the fire at a moment's notice. Guards stood just outside the door. Sometimes, a favored advisor slept nearby, not out of intimacy, but caution. After all, a royal throat was worth guarding. Even at midnight, you'd tilt your head, thinking, what must it have felt like to fall asleep while others watched over you? To know that even in your most vulnerable moments, you were never unobserved? Perhaps that's why the royal nightgown was so ornate. If you must be seen, you might as well look good doing it. You run your fingers along the robe again. It's heavier than it looks. The fur still soft, though it must have belonged to creatures long gone. The texture feels alive, as if it remembers the warmth it once held. You pull it around your shoulders, imagining how it must have felt centuries ago, the first rush of heat. The smell of the hearth lingering in the fibers. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you're not in the 21st century anymore. You're sitting by the glow of tallow candles, the shadows dancing across stone, the world outside silent and white. Some historians say these pajamas of power were a reflection of the times, symbols of wealth, but also armor against the unknown. Night was dangerous then. Candles burned low, fires died, and darkness belonged to things unseen. Dressing richly to sleep was a way of declaring, I am not afraid of the night. You breathe in deeply, feeling the weight of history in the folds. It's comforting, in a strange way, to know that centuries before you, someone else pulled the same robe tighter around their shoulders and thought, maybe now I can rest. The fire pops softly, throwing sparks that vanish mid-air. You can almost hear the faint snore of a servant nearby, the shuffle of feet in distant corridors. You lie back, the robe still draped over you, its warmth seeping in. Outside, the wind claws at the shutters, impatient and jealous. Inside, wrapped in fur and velvet, you smile. Because tonight, for all its cold and silence, you're dressed like royalty and sleeping. At last, doesn't seem so impossible. The scent of herbs fades as the morning unfolds, replaced by the deeper, more familiar smell of firewood and fresh bread drifting in from the kitchens below. The castle is awake now, properly awake, alive with footsteps. The clang of metal, the faint hum of life resuming after the long, frozen night. You sit up slowly, the air still crisp but not biting anymore. The fire has been rekindled, burning brighter, and you can see faint rays of winter sunlight filtering through the parchment-covered window. The light is weak, but it feels like victory, small, hard-won, golden victory. Soon, the Emperor will rise. The castle's rhythm shifts to anticipate that moment, like an orchestra tuning itself before the conductor steps in. The chamberlain enters first, bowing low, followed by attendants carrying robes, boots, and basins of steaming water. Their movements are quiet, precise, and strangely reverent. Because waking a ruler wasn't a casual affair. You watch as the servants go about their routine, as if they've done it 1,000 times, which, of course, they have. One stokes the fire, another adjusts the curtains, while a third carefully checks the emperor's slippers to ensure they've been properly warmed near the hearth. Then comes the ritual itself, the dressing of the emperor. You might think of it as simple vanity. But here, it's ceremony. The emperor doesn't just put on clothes, he ascends into them. Each layer, from the linen shirt to the heavy fur-lined mantle, is part of a performance. A transformation from vulnerable man to monarch. The servants help him rise from bed. He stretches, wincing slightly from the stiffness that cold always brings. The first garment is plain, a soft linen undershirt, warmed by the fire. Over that comes a tunic of fine wool, dyed deep red or blue, its edges trimmed with silk. Then a thick outer robe, lined with ermine, heavy enough to feel like armor against the air. You can almost feel the weight of it, not just the fabric, but what it represents. Each layer restores his distance from the world, reclaims the identity that sleep briefly stripped away. The final piece is the cloak, broad, magnificent, embroidered with gold thread that glints faintly in the light. As the chamberlain fastens it across his shoulders, the emperor exhales softly. The transition is complete. He's no longer the sleepless man who shivered through the night. He's once again the axis around which this entire fortress turns. The dog lifts his head and watches, tail thumping once against the floor. The queen's routine, across the corridor, mirrors his, though hers is gentler, more graceful. Her ladies enter quietly, carrying trays of polished ivory combs, vials of rosewater, and boxes of jewelry that glitter like captured sunlight. They move like dancers, each knowing her role without being told. Before dressing, the queen sits by the window for a few minutes of silence. The cold light paints her face pale, and her breath clouds faintly in the air. One of her ladies drapes a shawl around her shoulders. But she doesn't seem to notice. For a brief, private moment, she allows herself to simply be, not queen, not consort, but a woman watching morning arrive through frost. You find yourself imagining her thoughts. Perhaps she's wondering if the snow will delay travelers again. Or thinking of the letters she must dictate before midday. Or maybe she's remembering her homeland, warmer skies, softer winters, mornings filled with birdsong rather than the clamor of guards. Then, like her husband, she re-enters her role. Her maids lace her gown, silk layered over wool. An elegant defense against the cold. A necklace is clasped around her neck. Pearls against skin that still holds a faint blush from sleep. Finally, she rises, steady, poised, ready to meet the day. What strikes you most isn't the luxury, but the discipline. Every movement is controlled, every gesture purposeful. This is how people survived winter in palaces of stone, through ritual, repetition, and routine. The body might be freezing, but the rhythm, that sacred, daily choreography, kept the soul from stiffening. You glance toward the fire. It burns brighter now, reflecting in the polished metal of the warming pan still resting nearby. You think of how all these tiny rituals, the pan, the fur, the robe, the cup of herbal brew, built the invisible architecture of survival. The emperor finally steps toward the window. His breath fogs against the parchment screen. And beyond it, the sun is rising, weak, pale, but persistent. He watches for a long moment, saying nothing. Maybe he's thinking of the work ahead, petitions to sign, disputes to settle, emissaries to greet, or maybe he's thinking of nothing at all, just watching the light fight its way through the frost and feeling. For a moment, grateful. You smile faintly, because even a king, for all his grandeur, can find peace in the simple miracle of dawn. He turns to his attendants. Voice calm but commanding. Let them know I'll dine in the hall. The words ripple outward, setting the castle fully in motion. The great gears of the day begin to turn. You lie back against the pillow, feeling that warmth of purpose spreading through the air, the same warmth that's kept humans alive in cold places for centuries. And as the emperor leaves the room, his cloak sweeping softly across the floor, you think to yourself, it isn't the fire or the fur or the gold that keeps the cold away. It's the act of beginning again. The same way he does. The same way you will. Outside, the sun finally climbs free of the horizon. The frost gleams. And winter, for now, bows to the light. The warmth of morning doesn't last long. Castles have a way of stealing heat as quickly as they give it, swallowing the sun's brief generosity into walls that remember only stone. By the time you stand, the air feels colder again, not the sharp cold of night, but the steady, disciplined chill of daylight survival. Outside, the courtyard is alive with sound. The heavy wooden shutters creak open one by one, letting light and noise spill through the corridors. You can hear the thud of boots, the whinny of horses from the stables, and the rhythmic scrape of shovels clearing the snow. Somewhere, a cook bellows orders over the hiss of boiling pots. You cross the room slowly, pulling the fur robe tighter around your shoulders, and glance into the hallway. The contrast is startling. What was silent and ghostly by night has transformed into a world of motion and purpose. Servants move in pairs, carrying baskets of kindling, trays of bread, folded linens. A page hurries past with a polished helmet that gleams like liquid fire in the morning light. And above all this noise and movement, the heartbeat of the castle, lies one word that defines it: order. Because here, in the Empire of Frost, every action has its hour. The Emperor's day begins the same way it has for years, with the morning meal. Taken not in solitude but in ceremony. You follow, in your imagination, down the long hallway to the Great Hall, the heart of every castle, where stone walls rise like cliffs and banners hang unmoving in the still air. The hall is dim but immense. The cold has been fought back by dozens of fires burning in iron braziers, their smoke rising lazily toward beams darkened by centuries of soot. The Emperor's table sits on a raised dais, lined with furs and cushions. It looks less like furniture and more like a small kingdom within a larger one. He enters quietly, the sound of his boots echoing off the flagstones. Courtiers stand and bow. The hound pads in behind him, tail low, and takes up his familiar post beside the fire. The Emperor gestures for everyone to sit. The meal begins. Now, breakfast, in a medieval castle, was nothing like what you know today. There were no croissants or coffee or sweet fruits on silver trays. The fare was simpler, heavier, built for endurance. Bread, dark and dense. Cheese, sharp from age. A small slab of smoked meat or salted fish. A goblet of watered wine, warm, never cold, because cold drinks were thought to weaken the stomach. You can almost taste it, rough, earthy, practical, fuel, not indulgence. The Emperor eats in silence. As etiquette demands, his attendants stand behind him, ready with napkins or more wine. But no one speaks until he does. The sound of crackling fire and the occasional clink of a knife are the only voices in the room. Finally, he breaks the stillness. Has the messenger returned from the northern border? A steward bows. Not yet, Your Majesty. The passes are snowed in. The Emperor nods once, his expression unreadable. He takes another sip of wine. You can almost see his thoughts, the lines on his forehead deepening. The quiet machinery of command beginning its daily turn. Across the hall, the Queen enters, her steps measured but light. Her gown trails faintly against the floor. The color a soft winter blue that glimmers like frost in motion. Everyone rises. Again, but her smile is small. Restrained, she sits beside the Emperor. And for a brief moment, the entire hall seems to exhale. It's an old dance. This routine cloaked in reverence. The kind of ceremony that holds chaos at bay. You realize then that winter wasn't just a season here. It was a discipline. Every gesture, from the lighting of fires to the serving of meals, was an act of resistance. To eat together, to rise, to speak of duty before warmth could slip away, all of it meant survival. The hound yawns and shifts closer to the hearth. Somewhere in the background, a minstrel tunes a lute, filling the silence with faint, wandering notes. The melody is slow, uncertain, perhaps even improvised, but the Emperor doesn't stop it. Maybe the music makes the cold feel less absolute. You watch the scene unfold, the Queen breaking her bread into careful pieces. The Emperor leaning slightly forward as a servant unfolds a map beside him. The flicker of firelight against steel and silk. There's a solemn beauty in it, not grand, but steady. You think about how fragile this balance is, how much effort it takes to keep the cold, the hunger, and the fear from slipping back in. And maybe that's what castles really were, not fortresses of arrogance, but shelters of defiance, proof that even in the harshest winters, people would not surrender to the dark. You glance toward the window again. Beyond the banners, beyond the courtyard, snow is still falling, slowly now, gently, as if even winter is tired. The emperor finishes his meal, wipes his hands, and stands. "Prepare the council chamber," he says. His voice is calm, but final. The servants scatter like wind through the hall. You stay seated in your mind a moment longer, watching the firelight fade from gold to red. The hound lifts his head as his master passes, then lies down again with a contented sigh. The hall empties, the fires crackle, the snow keeps falling. And you think to yourself, as the echoes fade into the stone, ritual may not make you warm, but it reminds you why warmth matters. And in that reminder, somehow, people found the strength to go on. The great hall empties slowly, the last traces of warmth lingering like breath in the air. The emperor's footsteps echo down the corridor, followed by the steady rhythm of attendants carrying parchments, seals, and scrolls. You rise, in your imagination, and follow him, past flickering torches and faded tapestries, deeper into the heart of the castle. The corridors twist like veins, dim and echoing. The air grows colder the farther you walk, until it feels like you're descending not just through space but through temperature itself. Finally, you reach the council chamber, smaller than the hall, but far colder. The fire here is reluctant, as if even the wood doubts the worth of the conversation it must overhear. The emperor takes his place at the head of the long oak table. The surface is scarred with age and the grooves of too many decisions. Courtiers and advisors file in, shuffling parchment, coughing softly. The smell of ink, wax, and wool fills the air, the scent of government, equal parts diligence and exhaustion. This is the other kind of cold in the castle, the political one. You watch quietly as the emperor listens to reports, the kind of dry, meticulous information that decides the fates of thousands. Grain stores are low, roads are impassable, the river trade has frozen. A messenger from the south brings news of sickness among the livestock. Another warns of unrest in the villages beyond the forest. You see it in his eyes, the fatigue behind the calm. He doesn't raise his voice, he doesn't have to. His presence does the work. The courtiers lean forward slightly every time he shifts in his chair, waiting for a word, a gesture, anything that signals approval or displeasure. He speaks at last. "Send word to the abbey," he says, his tone even but weighted. "Tell them the crown will release grain from its stores. The people must not starve before spring." The chamber falls silent for a heartbeat, not from objection, but surprise. Grain from the royal stores is a rare mercy. The treasurer clears his throat. "Your Majesty, the reserves are all ready." The emperor's gaze cuts across the table. "Then find a way to make them enough." You can almost feel the temperature drop another degree. Moments like this remind you that ruling in winter meant more than keeping warm. It meant managing scarcity, of food, of light, of patience. Every decision carried the weight of hunger and the quiet. invisible pressure of survival. You glance at the courtiers, their anxious eyes, their ink-stained fingers, the faint clouds of their breath in the frigid air. The entire council seems caught between reason and fear. The queen enters quietly halfway through the meeting, her presence softening the edges of the room. She doesn't sit beside the emperor, she never does during council, but she stands near the window. Listening. Perhaps, she says gently after a pause. The abbey can send medicine in return. Their healers still have stores of herbs that might ease the cough spreading among the servants. Her voice cuts through the tension not like a blade, but like sunlight slipping through clouds. The advisors murmur their agreement. The emperor glances toward her, a small nod. Nothing more, but enough to show that her words hold weight. You smile faintly. Even in the age of crowns, diplomacy often began in whispers rather than decrees. The meeting drags on. The fire crackles. Wax drips from candles. And still they speak, of taxes, alliances, trade routes buried in snow. You feel the weariness in the room deepen. The way winter settles into bones that have already given too much. At last, the emperor stands. That's enough for now. We'll speak again after Vespers. The courtiers rise and bow deeply, the rustle of their robes echoing in the cold chamber. One by one, they file out, their footsteps fading into the corridor until only the emperor and queen remain. He leans his hands against the table for a moment, head bowed, the weight of decision pressing visibly against his shoulders. She steps closer, placing a hand gently on his sleeve. "You did what you must," she says softly. He doesn't answer right away. His gaze drifts toward the window, where snow still falls beyond the glassless slit, 1,000 flakes swirling against a sky the color of lead. Sometimes I wonder if that's ever enough. Her hand lingers. It has to be. For a moment, the air feels warmer, not because of the fire, it's barely alive now, but because of that small human exchange in a room built for power, not comfort. You realize, watching them, that the hardest part of ruling wasn't command or calculation. It was enduring the silence that came after every choice, the silence of knowing that mercy could only stretch so far. That warmth could never reach everyone. They stand together for a while, not speaking, watching the snow. You look at them, two figures wrapped in fur and thought, and it occurs to you that in this frozen castle, compassion itself was the rarest heat. The emperor straightens, calls for the servants, and the spell breaks. The queen steps back, resuming her role. The world moves again. But for a heartbeat, just one, the stone walls seem to remember warmth. And as you follow them out into the corridor, you can still hear the whisper of her words echoing faintly through the cold. It has to be enough. When the council chamber empties, the castle exhales. The sounds of activity echo again through the corridors, distant voices. The dull ring of hammers from the blacksmith's yard. The shuffling of servants carrying logs for the next round of fires. But for a little while, the emperor retreats. He walks alone, down the narrow passage that leads toward the private chapel. The torches along the wall flicker, their light catching the frost that's crept into the mortar like veins of glass. His boots strike softly against the stone, the rhythm even, deliberate, not from ceremony now, but from thought. You follow in your mind, watching the way the light glances off the silver thread of his cloak. His pace slows as the corridor widens, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by the quiet. He pauses at the chapel door. It's small, almost humble compared to the rest of the fortress, a room meant for solitude, not spectacle. Inside, the air is colder still, heavy with the scent of old wax and incense that's long since lost its sweetness. Candles burn weakly on a narrow altar, their flames bowing slightly with each draught that slips beneath the door. The emperor kneels, no throne, no audience, no crown, just a man and the silence of stone. You can almost hear his breath, the whisper of wool as he clasps his hands, the faint creak of the wooden floor beneath his knees. For all the weight of empire, prayer is the one act that doesn't require witnesses. He doesn't pray loudly, never has. He doesn't ask for victory, or favor, or forgiveness, only clarity, strength to endure another day of cold, of scarcity, of decisions that never seem right enough. His words drift upward, not expecting answers, just release. The sound of wind outside becomes a kind of harmony, low, continuous, like the earth itself humming beneath his prayer. In that moment, you see the emperor not as a ruler, but as a man trapped between burdens, faith and reason, mercy and order, light and frost. You wonder if he prays to God or to the silence itself. Behind him, the door opens softly. The queen enters without a word, her steps almost soundless. She doesn't interrupt, she simply kneels beside him, her hands folded, her head bowed. Two silhouettes in candlelight, one crowned by power, the other by patience. It's a rare moment of equality. Here, there is no court, no hierarchy, only shared breath and quiet devotion. You think about what faith meant in a world like this, not certainty, but structure, a way to believe that winter had meaning, that suffering wasn't just endless repetition. Religion, in the medieval mind, wasn't separate from survival, it was survival. The emperor finishes his prayer and lifts his gaze toward the cross above the altar. The wood is rough, carved by a monk decades ago. Time has darkened it, but the shape remains sharp, defiant. He rises slowly, his knees stiff from the cold, and offers his hand to the queen. She takes it, the faintest smile ghosting across her face. Neither speaks. They don't need to. The silence between them feels sacred now, like warmth hidden beneath the snow. They leave the chapel together. The corridor beyond feels brighter somehow, though the torches haven't changed. Maybe it's them, maybe faith, however brief, carries its own light. You linger behind in thought. The chapel's emptiness feels vast, echoing. The candles sputter, sending tiny sparks of light upward before vanishing into the shadowed rafters. You wonder how many rulers came here before, how many whispered into the same cold air, hoping that someone, somewhere, was listening. You reach out, brushing your fingers against the smooth stone of the altar. It's colder than ice, and yet, somehow, the touch feels grounding. This is what endurance looked like in the Middle Ages, not grand gestures, but quiet persistence, believing in warmth even when you couldn't feel it. The door closes gently behind the royal pair, the sound soft as snow. You take one last look at the flickering candles. They tremble, as if tired, but they're still burning. And in this world, that's enough of a miracle. You turn to follow, your footsteps echoing faintly in the emptiness. The corridor awaits, colder. Yes, but no longer without purpose. The emperor walks ahead, the queen beside him, the faintest trail of warmth lingering in their wake. And as you watch them disappear into the stone labyrinth, you think to yourself, maybe prayer doesn't change the cold. Maybe it simply reminds you that you're not alone in it. By midday, the castle has come fully to life, not in warmth. Exactly, but in motion. The clang of iron on iron rings from the courtyard, echoing off the stone walls. You can hear the low murmur of soldiers drilling, the creak of saddles, the stamp of hooves on frozen ground. The smell of hay and horses drifts faintly through the corridor, sharp, earthy, oddly comforting. You follow the emperor now, in your imagination, as he steps into the courtyard wrapped in fur and command. The air is painfully bright. Sunlight glints off the frost that clings to every surface, the ramparts, the iron hinges, even the tips of the spears held by the guards. The world is dazzling, cold enough to hurt your eyes, and beautiful in that austere, unforgiving way that only winter can manage. The soldiers line up as he approaches. The sound of boots thudding in unison fills the space like a heartbeat. They bow their heads briefly, breath misting in the air like smoke from unseen fires. You can feel the emperor's gaze sweep across them. He doesn't need to shout. Authority radiates quietly from him, the kind that's earned through countless winters like this one. He moves down the line, inspecting armor dulled by frost, faces reddened by cold, eyes that flicker between pride and fatigue. He stops before one young guard whose gloved hands tremble slightly on his spear. The emperor pauses. Too cold? The guard shakes his head quickly. Never, Majesty. A faint smile touches the emperor's lips, a trace of humor beneath the frost. You're lying, he says softly, but that's what loyalty sounds like. The soldiers laugh quietly, grateful for the warmth of his tone. The sound ripples through the ranks, a brief rebellion against the chill. You realize that moments like this, small, human gestures, were as essential as fire in keeping a kingdom alive. Discipline alone couldn't sustain them. They needed something warmer, connection, camaraderie, a shared defiance of the season. The emperor turns toward the captain of the guard. Rotate the watches more often, he says. No man should freeze for the sake of pride. The captain bows, relieved. Orders like that travel fast, faster than the cold itself. You can almost hear the ripple of gratitude move through the line. The queen watches from an arched balcony above, her cloak drawn tight. The wind catches her hood, and for a moment you see the faint gleam of her hair in the sunlight. She doesn't call out or wave. She simply observes, quietly, attentively. You sense that this is her role. To see what others overlook. To remember what power tends to forget. She turns away, and her attendants follow her down the stone steps toward the gardens. Gardens, of course, being generous. In winter, they're skeletal. Branches like black lace against the snow. Fountains frozen mid-cascade. Statues half buried under drifts. But even here, there's life, if you know where to look. You walk with her now. She pauses beside a low wall where a cluster of evergreen herbs still clings to life, rosemary, thyme, the stubborn survivors. She brushes her gloved fingers across the leaves and brings them to her face. Inhaling the faint scent, they endure, she says softly to no one in particular. Her maid nods. They always do, my lady. The queen smiles faintly. That's why I keep them here. You can't help but admire her quiet resilience. In a world ruled by ceremony, she finds meaning in the small, the living, the overlooked. These herbs will flavor the emperor's supper later. Their scent rising from a bowl of steaming stew, a small, fragrant rebellion against the monotony of winter fare. The sun climbs higher, but its warmth is an illusion. The wind sharpens again, cutting through the courtyard, stirring snow from the battlements. The emperor looks up toward the ramparts, where a flag snaps in the gust, a lion emblazoned on gold, bright even against the gray sky. He squints, the sunlight reflecting off the snow into his eyes. The crown on his head seems almost secondary now, just another weight against the cold. You can almost hear his thoughts, the same weary reflection shared by anyone who's ever led others through hardship. If I appear strong, they will believe. If they believe, we endure. He turns back toward the great hall. The soldiers salute. The hound follows close behind, tail wagging faintly, leaving paw prints in the snow that will vanish by dusk. The queen returns to her chambers, the scent of rosemary still clinging to her gloves. The emperor disappears into shadowed corridors, where duty waits like another kind of winter. And you remain here for a moment, standing in the courtyard of your imagination, watching your breath drift upward. The air tastes clean, metallic, infinite. You think of the line that could have been written by any chronicler. In any age, even in the heart of ice, life finds a way to breathe. The wind howls once more, bending flags and carrying voices into the sky. Somewhere a bell rings, low and solemn. And as the castle settles into its rhythm again, you realize that this constant dance between cold and endurance, is the true pulse of medieval life. Not comfort, not glory, just persistence. And somehow, that's far more noble. Afternoon in a medieval castle doesn't feel like progress. It feels like survival extended, a truce between cold and willpower. The light turns soft, silver gray, creeping across the flagstones like water. The fires burn lower now, not for lack of fuel, but to conserve it. Every log, every ember, has to last until the next dawn. You follow the emperor back inside, through a maze of corridors that smell faintly of smoke, tallow, and damp wool. The warmth from the courtyard fades almost instantly. The air grows still again, heavy with the hush of stone. He stops before a tall door bound in iron. It opens slowly, revealing one of the most private rooms in any castle, the royal library. You didn't expect it to feel like this. Not grand, not gleaming, but intimate. The air is thick with the scent of vellum and ink, the kind of smell that lives in quiet spaces and outlives its owners. The light filters through narrow windows, falling in soft stripes across shelves of parchment scrolls and hand-copied books. Each one is priceless, not because of its material, but because every letter was carved out of time itself by the hand of a monk somewhere. The emperor walks to a lectern by the fire, brushing a thin layer of dust from a bound volume. He opens it carefully. The pages crackle faintly, that gentle, papery sigh of something ancient. His eyes scan the text. Though you can tell he's not really reading. Not yet. He's remembering. There's something about the stillness of libraries that invites memory. Here, surrounded by centuries of words, even silence seems articulate. He traces a finger along a line of Latin script, a passage from an old philosopher. Perhaps, or a chronicle of his ancestors. You imagine the words in his head. Something about virtue, or endurance, or the duty of kings. The kind of wisdom that sounds clean on parchment but feels much heavier in practice. He closes the book gently, as though not to wake it. The queen enters quietly, her steps soft against the rug. In her hands, she carries a small silver cup, warm wine steeped with cloves and honey. She sets it beside him without a word. He looks up and smiles faintly. "You always know," he says. "I always see," she replies, her voice soft but steady. You watch them, two figures framed by fading light, surrounded by the ghosts of history and the smell of ink. For a moment, the crown seems irrelevant. They could be any two people in winter, sharing warmth between them like a secret. She reaches for a book herself, a smaller one, bound in worn leather, its edges frayed from use. It's not philosophy or politics, but poetry. You recognize the rhythm of it in her lips as she reads silently, her expression softening. He watches her for a while. "Does it help?" he asks. She nods. "It reminds me that words can still bloom, even when the world freezes." He chuckles under his breath. "You sound like one of the Abbey scribes." "Maybe they know something we forget," she says. "How to find warmth in letters." You find yourself smiling too. Because she's right. In a world where even the fires struggle to stay alive, words become their own form of heat, small, bright things that survive the dark. The emperor pours a little wine from the cup and takes a sip. The smell fills the air, rich, spiced, a promise that warmth can still be tasted if not always felt. He sets the cup down, then picks up a quill. You watch as he begins to write. Slowly, carefully, not a decree this time. A letter. "To my son," he begins, and you realize what kind of writing this is, not for the present, but for the future. He writes about the cold, about the duties of kings, about the patience required to outlast the season. But the tone isn't stern, it's gentle, reflective. He writes not as ruler to heir, but as father to child. You can almost hear his thoughts between the lines. You will inherit the crown. Yes, but you must also inherit the stillness, the waiting, the understanding that every winter, no matter how long, eventually yields. When he finishes, he sands the ink, seals the letter, and tucks it between the pages of the book. He doesn't say where it will go or whether it will ever be read. That's the strange thing about such acts. They're as much prayers as they are messages. The queen closes her own book, watching the fire. "Do you ever think," she says quietly, "that the cold teaches us more than comfort ever could?" He looks at her, thoughtful. "It teaches us what not to take for granted." The fire crackles softly, its light flickering across their faces. You realize that, in this frozen fortress, knowledge and warmth have become the same thing. Books, letters, stories, all forms of fire that don't burn out when the wood is gone. The emperor stands, taking one last look around the library. Have more logs brought in. He tells the servant near the door. Books deserve warmth, too. You laugh softly. It's an absurd thought, but beautiful. As they leave, the flames dance higher for a moment, reflecting in the polished surface of the emperor's cup. The smell of spiced wine lingers long after they're gone. You walk to the lectern in your mind and touch the edge of the open book. The parchment is cool, but you can still feel the ghost of warmth from his hands. And you think to yourself, as the fire hums behind you, perhaps that's how wisdom survives winter, not by brilliance, but by endurance. Not as flame, but as ember. By late afternoon, the light begins to fade again, slow and deliberate, like a candle burning down to its base. The cold creeps back through the corridors, quiet and patient, reclaiming every inch the fires had won. You can feel it in the air before you see it, that dense, metallic chill that smells faintly of snow and iron. The castle adjusts accordingly. Servants move through the halls with fresh torches and bundles of wood. Their footsteps quick, their voices low. The rhythm of their work feels almost like prayer, steady, repetitive, purposeful. You follow the queen this time. She's in her sewing chamber with her ladies, gathered near a single hearth that struggles to keep the cold at bay. The light from the window has turned pale blue, and it rests gently on the embroidery stretched across her lap. The room is quiet except for the sound of needles piercing cloth, the whisper of thread sliding through linen. This is what the royal afternoon looks like, stillness disguised as labor. The queen's hands move with practiced grace, pulling silver thread through the fabric to form a delicate border. It's part of a new altar cloth for the chapel. She's told them. Her fingers are red from the chill. But she doesn't stop. She works not because she must, but because work keeps the cold and the thoughts away. Her ladies sit around her, sewing smaller pieces, talking softly about trivial things. The quality of last week's honey, the stubbornness of a mule, a dream someone had of spring. It's not gossip, not really, just warmth in words. Something to fill the silence before night comes. You notice how communal the moment feels. The queen isn't distant here, she's part of them. Her voice one thread among many. Did your child's cough ease? She asks one maid gently. The girl nods, eyes shining with gratitude. Good, the queen says. Make sure the nurse adds time to the fire tonight. It helps. You can hear the care in her tone, not performative, not rehearsed, just real. And it strikes you. In this world of etiquette and distance, empathy was its own quiet rebellion. A gust of wind rattles the shutters, and one of the younger maids flinches. The fire gutters briefly, dimming the room. For a heartbeat, the cold feels closer, heavier, but the queen doesn't move. She simply reaches for the poker, stirs the coals, and adds another log. Sparks leap upward, a small constellation reborn. There, she murmurs, we won't let the cold win that easily. The room exhales with her. You glance around, noticing the details that make this space hers. A chest of colored threads. A small prayer book by the window. A pot of dried lavender hanging from the rafters. Everything chosen not for beauty, but for endurance. Even the colors in her embroidery, golds, reds, deep blues, seem to defy the monotone gray of the world outside. Historians rarely write about afternoons like this. They write about battles and treaties. Not needlework and conversation. But this quiet persistence, is how kingdoms survived when swords couldn't help them. The queen looks up for a moment, meeting your gaze across time. You can almost hear her voice. Calm and certain. You endure winter not with power, she might say, but with patience. You keep your hands moving, your heart steady, and your fire alive. Outside, the sky darkens further. Snow begins again, thin, drifting, endless. You can hear it tapping faintly against the window. Each flake a whisper of the season's persistence. The queen finishes her row of stitches, ties the thread neatly, and sits back. Her ladies watch her in quiet admiration. "You've a gift, my lady," one says softly. The queen smiles, that same quiet, tired smile that has carried her through 100 such days. "No," she says, "I have practice." You love that answer, because it's the truth of all endurance. The difference between despair and strength isn't talent, but repetition. The hour deepens. One of the ladies lights a new candle. Its flame trembles before catching steady. The queen glances toward the window again. The courtyard is fading into twilight. The world beyond reduced to blue and white. She sets her embroidery aside and rises, stretching her stiff fingers. "Enough work for today," she says gently. "Go warm yourselves before supper." They curtsy, grateful, and begin gathering their things. The queen lingers for a moment, her hand resting lightly on the back of the chair. Then she walks to the window, presses her palm against the glassless covering, and watches the snow fall. The light from the candle behind her glows around her figure like a halo, soft, flickering, fragile, but undeniably there. And you think, as you watch her stand between the flame and the frost, that this quiet grace, this unspoken defiance, is how true royalty survives winter. Not with crowns, but with calm. The fire sighs, the snow falls, the thread glimmers faintly in the last of the light, and the queen, surrounded by silence, becomes what every person in this castle is secretly trying to be, a small, steady flame that refuses to die. Evening comes early in winter. By the time the bells in the chapel toll 6 times, the sky has already fallen into indigo, that deep, velvet blue that feels like the world has decided to stop moving. The torches along the corridor flare to life, their light trembling against the cold stone. You walk beside the emperor again, following him down a hall that leads toward the great dining chamber. The air hums with quiet energy. Servants hurry to and fro, balancing trays of steaming dishes, pitchers of mulled wine, and baskets of bread so fresh you can smell the faint sweetness even through the smoke. This is one of the few times in the day when the castle almost feels warm, not because of the fires, but because of the gathering of people. The emperor enters first, and conversation halts immediately. Everyone rises, bowing, then sits again when he gestures for them to do so. The queen follows shortly after, her cloak lined with white fur, the edges sparkling faintly with frost. She moves with that calm, measured grace you've come to know, the kind that quiets a room without effort. The hall is magnificent in its austerity, banners hanging like shadows from the beams. The long table stretching beneath a canopy of light from dozens of candles. The smell of roasted meat mingles with cinnamon and cloves from the wine, an intoxicating, ancient perfume of survival. The first course arrives, a thick stew of venison and root vegetables. The kind of meal designed to silence hunger and gratitude alike. Then platters of dark bread, slabs of cheese, and bowls of spiced apples. You can almost taste the heat rising from the food, the way it warms the air near your face, fogging the chill just long enough to make you forget it exists. The emperor eats slowly, methodically, speaking only in fragments to the men seated nearest him. Discussions of trade, of travel routes, of the coming spring, the same endless cycle of concerns that define a ruler's life. But there's a softness tonight that wasn't there in the morning. Perhaps the wine helps. Perhaps it's the simple relief of another day survived. The queen listens, occasionally offering a thought or a smile. At one point, a jester appears, a small man in motley clothes, his bells jingling faintly as he bows before the table. The emperor waves him on. And for a few minutes, laughter replaces the sound of politics. It's not loud or careless, no one here would dare that, but it's real. The jester mimics the clumsy gait of an absent noble, pretends to slip on an invisible patch of ice. And everyone chuckles, even the emperor. The queen hides her smile behind her goblet, her eyes glimmering in the candlelight. You can feel the shift, subtle but unmistakable. For this brief hour, power gives way to humanity. They are no longer rulers and courtiers, but simply people sharing warmth and food while the wind howls outside. The dog is there too, of course, curled under the emperor's chair, tail twitching whenever a bone drops to the floor. A servant discreetly passes him scraps, pretending not to see the emperor's amused glance. You find yourself smiling as you watch. It's such a small thing, this dinner, yet it feels like the center of the universe. A fragile warmth surrounded by miles of cold and silence. As the courses pass, the hall grows louder, livelier. Someone begins to sing near the end of the table, a rough soldier's voice. Off-key but heartfelt, the song is simple, about the turning of seasons and the promise of spring. A few others join in, uncertainly at first, then with growing confidence. The emperor doesn't stop them. Instead, he lifts his goblet slightly, as if toasting the melody itself. The sound rises, filling the hall like smoke. The fire crackles, the candles flicker, and you realize that this warmth of voices, this shared defiance against the dark, is the real heart of every castle's winter. Not the walls, not the crowns, the people. When the song ends, there's a quiet moment where no one moves. Then the queen begins to clap softly, and laughter ripples through the room again. The emperor leans toward her. "You always encourage them," he says. "They need it," she replies simply. "So do you." He chuckles, raising his goblet. "To warmth," he says. She smiles. "To endurance." The toast spreads through the hall. Voices overlapping, goblets clinking. The sound feels ancient and eternal all at once, the oldest kind of prayer. Made not to gods but to life itself. Later, when the plates are cleared and the guests begin to drift away, the emperor remains by the fire. He stares into the flames, his face illuminated in gold and shadow. The queen sits beside him, silent but near. For a while, neither speaks. The fire pops softly. Outside, the wind moans against the shutters like some tired ghost. Finally, he says, "Do you ever wonder if they'll remember us? The warmth, not the rule?" She doesn't answer immediately. Then, in that soft, measured tone that always carries more weight than command, she says, "If they remember the warmth, they've remembered everything that mattered." You sit with that thought for a long moment. The candles burn low. The last embers in the hearth glow faintly red. And as the hall empties into darkness, you feel something deeper than comfort, the quiet realization that history isn't made only by what survives, but by what endures. The laughter, the firelight, the small, shared warmth between one heartbeat and the next. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine it, the sound of voices, the glow of the hearth, the hum of life refusing to fade. And in that flickering light, winter almost seems merciful. The great hall finally empties, its laughter fading into the corridors like music retreating down a long tunnel. The fires dim to embers, glowing faintly in the quiet. Only the soft crackle of settling wood remains, a sound as intimate as breathing. The emperor stands slowly, his joints stiff, his breath a thin mist in the cooling air. The hound rises too, stretching with a low groan, tail brushing the floor. The queen joins him at the doorway, her hand finding his arm in a silent gesture of companionship. Together, they leave the hall, leaving behind warmth, sound, and company, and walk into the hush of the sleeping castle. You follow them through the long corridors, where torchlight flickers over old stone. The air here smells of wax and age, that particular scent of places that have endured more winters than anyone alive can count. Their footsteps echo softly, rhythmic, the kind of sound that might lull someone to sleep if they followed long enough. They speak little as they walk. There's nothing left to say tonight, not about politics or hunger or the cold. They have given all their words to others. What remains between them now is silence, and the understanding that comes only after years of facing the same dark together. They reach the royal chambers. Servants bow and withdraw. Only the faint glow of the hearth greets them. The last fire of the day. The queen moves first, kneeling briefly to stir it, coaxing a few last flames to life. Sparks leap upward, golden and slow, and their light dances across the furs draped over the bed. For a moment, neither moves. The castle beyond these walls has fallen quiet, the guards on the ramparts, the maids in the kitchens, the dogs in the stables, all subdued beneath the weight of night. You can almost feel it, the deep, shared fatigue of a world holding its breath until morning. The emperor removes his cloak and crown, the symbols of his power set aside like armor. Without them, he seems smaller, but also lighter. He sits near the fire, rubbing his hands together, his face softened by the glow. The queen sits beside him, close enough that their shoulders touch. Outside, the wind has returned. It moans faintly through the window slits, a sound that could be mistaken for the voice of the past, a reminder that winter always finds its way back. The emperor gazes into the flames. "It's strange," he murmurs, "how even this fire feels alive, as though it knows we depend on it." The queen tilts her head, smiling faintly. "Perhaps it does. Everything that keeps us alive must know its purpose." He laughs quietly, though there's a shadow in it. And when spring comes, what will the fire do then? It rests, she says simply, like us. You feel the weight of her words linger in the air. They sit together in silence again, listening to the slow rhythm of the flames. The hound lies down beside them, curling near the warmth. His breathing steadies, long, deep sighs that blend with the fire's gentle crackle. Time begins to slow. The emperor leans back slightly, his voice a murmur now. Do you remember the first winter here? The queen's eyes soften. How could I forget? We thought the walls would never keep out the cold, and we burned through a year's worth of wood before Christmas. He chuckles. And yet we survived. She nods. We always do. The simplicity of it, we always do, lands like a benediction. You watch them sit there, the glow of the fire turning their faces into gentle silhouettes. Every line of age, every quiet gesture, feels like proof of endurance. You realize this, more than crowns, more than castles, is the true legacy of their reign, the art of enduring winters. Both outside and within, the emperor's eyes drift toward the window. Snow is falling again, slow, steady, silent. It catches the faint moonlight, turning the world silver. He whispers, almost to himself, so much cold, and yet so much light. The queen leans her head lightly against his shoulder. That's how winter forgives itself, she says. You can feel it too. That bittersweet calm that comes only when the world is at its stillest. The fire's low, the wind's quieting, the darkness no longer threatening but gentle. The emperor closes his eyes. Tomorrow will be the same, he murmurs. Yes, she answers, and that's the mercy of it. The flames settle lower, the room dims. You can almost hear the snow outside landing softly on the rooftops. Each flake a whisper against centuries of stone. The queen rises first, pulling the fur blanket higher over the bed. The emperor joins her, moving with the slow grace of someone who has learned that haste is for younger years. The hound circles once, twice, then curls at their feet. They lie down together, not as rulers, not as legends, but simply as two people who have survived another day of cold. The queen exhales, a long, quiet breath. Do you think our grandchildren will know how we lived? The emperor smiles faintly in the half-light. If they ever sleep through a winter night and feel safe, then yes, they'll know. Her hand finds his beneath the furs. Their fingers entwine. The fire fades to a low amber glow. You can feel the castle settle with them, the vast, silent body of it easing into rest. Somewhere in the distance, a watch bell rings. Somewhere, a torch sputters out. The wind softens to a sigh. And you, the unseen witness, feel your own breath slow to match theirs. Because this is how the story ends, not with trumpets or triumphs, but with warmth earned and darkness embraced. The emperor dreams. The queen sleeps beside him. The hound shifts once, then stills. Outside, the snow keeps falling. Inside, peace at last. The fire fades to ember. The night deepens. And the castle, proud, ancient, and weary, dreams with them. End of script. Sweet dreams.